you doing, guys? This is Eric from rulethewasteland.com, secretoftheinternet.com. This video is about the top 5 things that I think could start a true apocalyptic type shit hit the fan scenario. Now, I don't think, luckily, that any of these things are particularly likely, but they are the most likely to start some sort of massive, true shit hit the fan, end of the world as we know it, WROL type situations. I recently did an interview with JJ Johnson at Reality Survival, and you should check out his channel because it's very good. He's been making some great content lately. And this is one of the things that he asked me in that interview, and I'll put a link to that interview in the description, was what things do I think are most likely to cause actual shit hit the fan? And I've said before in this channel that I'm about preparing for, as Jack Speaker says, when times get tougher, even if they don't, all just general preparedness, making sure you can do without systems of support, things like that. So I don't really want you to focus on trying to prepare for these massive events necessarily, but it's something that I think about, and it's worth at least mentioning, and a lot of people want to know this stuff, so I definitely want to cover it in this video. And this video, or this list rather, in this video, I'm starting from the ones that, I'll count down from the top 5. So the least likely of the list to the most likely. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's the order of them happening, per se, just the order of if they happened, the chances of them causing a severe shit hit the fan apocalypse type scenario. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as the video goes on. So number 5 would be some kind of massive natural disaster. Something like the Yellowstone super caldera or another massive volcano. Maybe the San Andreas fault goes off, or comet lands, like in Lucifer's Hammer, that book, which is pretty good. You should check it out if you haven't already. Something like that. Obviously, localized natural disasters like hurricanes and even regular earthquakes and floods can cause shit hit the fan scenarios, but they're not the true apocalypse type shit hit the fan scenarios. Only maybe in extremely localized areas. They're just too small of a geographical area to really be considered a massive end of the world as we know it type situation. So while you might encounter certain elements of a real shit hit the fan scenarios, if you're right where these things happen, like looters or things like that, it's just not covering enough of an area of the world to really be considered a true shit hit the fan scenario. So the type of event that would be big enough to cause something like that over most of a country or even most of a state is pretty unlikely. But it is probably one of the more likely of all the possible scenarios. So that's why I put it at number 5. Number 4 is a massive economic collapse in any given country or even a worldwide economic collapse. Now, the reason this is only number 4 and not number 1 is because this list is about the chances of it actually causing a massive, widespread, like grid down type of true apocalyptic shit hit the fan scenario. So while I think this is probably the most likely of all the things on this list to actually occur, some kind of economic collapse, it's not necessarily the most likely to actually cause a grid down total shit hit the fan, end of the world as we know it scenario. Because in an economic collapse, all the infrastructure is still going to be there. Everyone still has a vested interest in continuing, a modern way of life. It's not necessarily going to cause the grid down. Certainly it could if certain things happen, but I don't think that that is going to be the outcome of an economic collapse. And it hasn't really been in the past in other countries where we've seen economic collapses. We see certain types of civil unrest and things like that, and it definitely gets really shitty and would qualify as a shit hit the fan scenario, certainly, but I don't think it would really reach the level of a true apocalyptic grid down, without rule of law, end of the world as we know it type situation. So that's why massive economic collapse is just number 4 on this list, even though I think it's probably one of the more likely things to happen of this list. Number 3 would be a nuclear war. Obviously, this would cause all sorts of chaos and damage. It would also be one of the more difficult ones to survive, depending on how severe and widespread the nuclear war was. Luckily, I don't think it's very likely, like most of the other things on this list, with maybe the exception of an economic collapse or something like that. I don't think a widespread, all-out nuclear war is, at this point, super likely, and that's a good thing. But it certainly would be capable of causing massive Mad Max type scenarios. In fact, that is the actual situation in the Mad Max movie, or the Road Warrior movie at least, which causes the typical kind of archetypal apocalypse scenario is nuclear war. So that's certainly on the list. I have it as my third most likely. Number 2 on the list is a disease pandemic of pretty much any kind that's massive enough to affect pretty much the whole country, or at least big sections of it. We haven't seen something like that in a long time, but it's still certainly possible. We've had scares of it with things like Ebola and SARS and bird flu and swine flu and things like that. Luckily, none of them have actually risen to the level of true pandemics, at least in the United States, but it's certainly something that's possible. And the longer we go with people living in close proximity to each other, population densities are increasing, things like that. We're importing a lot of third world immigrants and things who haven't had all the same vaccinations. They don't have all the same hygiene practices and things like that. The chances of a massive disease pandemic go up. And obviously there always could be some kind of mutation in a normal flu or one of these more virulent, dangerous diseases that could cause a pretty sudden change in how quickly and how negatively it affects the population. So disease pandemic is certainly one of the possibilities that could cause a widespread massive shit hit the fan apocalypse type scenario, because with the exception of something like an economic collapse, a disease pandemic actually has the ability to take out the grid, in the sense that if enough people are affected, a normal way of life becomes pretty much impossible. If we have something that really is seriously affecting 20, 30, 40% of the population, you're going to see a normal way of life grind to a halt pretty quick in that situation. And even if it doesn't rise to that level of, how much is affecting the population, if people start becoming scared, if it's affecting 5 or even 10 or even 5% of the population, people are not going to just start going to work and going to the grocery store and doing their jobs without a care in the world, because they're going to be really afraid of catching this disease. And that alone, the actions taken to avoid it, could cause a lot of crazy shit hit the fan type situations, which might actually lead to grid down apocalypse, if you will. So that's why it's number 2 for me. The number 1 most likely that I think event to cause a true apocalypse shit hit the fan scenario would be some kind of EMP or solar flare. Now, I'm not saying that this is likely. I'm just saying of this list, it's the most likely to cause a true, Road Warrior, Mad Max type scenario, at least in the United States. We always have the potential for a natural solar flare, a Kerrigan event type of situation. A lot of the modern infrastructure and way of life and everything that we use today in America is based on electronics, and relatively fragile electronics at that. Not just things like telegraph cables, which were damaged in the original Carrington event, but those are fairly robust when it comes to modern electronics like circuits and computers and some really much smaller, more delicate electronics that control everything. Just internet, appliances, vehicles, even things like watches and flashlights now are more fragile than they were back in the day. So a serious solar flare, or certainly an EMP from a North Korean nuke or something, which there's rumors that the Russians and the North Koreans and maybe even the Chinese are all developing these EMP type weapons. So, and it's not insane to think that somebody would be using this against us, even if there's no natural solar flare or EMP type event. So in my mind, that is, of this list, the most likely thing to cause a true shit hit the fan apocalypse in the United States. I don't think it's likely. I think it's a small chance it actually will happen, but I think those are the 5 things that are most likely to have caused it if it does happen. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.